So back in March of 2020, the opportunity to participate in a White House working group phone call on COVID government disaster relief financing government. And so if you think back to 2020, the very first week of COVID, so Friday, March 13th was the first official day of COVID. And from Friday, March 13th, that following week is when we saw the government mandates start to roll out nationwide, almost in immediate unison. Back in those days, there was a palpable fear. None of us knew what was happening. None of us knew what was going on. And I had a number of clients that I was working with on a CFO basis. And so the most common question is, Brad, what do we do? I immediately went to work identifying, well, what are the options out there? There was a SBA disaster loan program. Ultimately, that became what was known as the EIDL, the EIDL, and the government streamlined it. But at the time, there was a disaster loan program. It was the traditional disaster loan that clients had the opportunity to submit a paper application to because they were operating in a federally declared emergency zone, and you could get up to $2 million of funding for working capital needs as a result of being in this emergency zone. So we were doing a lot of work in that space. We were one of the first folks to be working in there, and so I remember a banker came to me and was like, "Wow, Brad, like how in the world did you pivot so quickly?" And I remember over the weekend I created the website called COVID-19loans.org, and it was just blowing up massive amounts of interest because people knew what to do. And I just said, well, I sat in the weekend and we were all locked up, and I thought, well, you got to do something. This is our mission, is to help small business owners, and this is their time of need. And if we can't help small business owners navigate this right now financially, then what are we doing in business? And so I just said, went to work. And so he said, well, that's amazing. You should be part of this conference call because I think you get a lot out of it. It's on government disaster relief financing. I said, great, sounds right up my alley. So he sent me the information, and I remember getting this conference call. There was a live operator on the line, and I did give name, address, phone number. So I thought that's kind of weird, but didn't really think too much of it. I have a background in equity research, and so it was similar to the way we'd go to get on equity research calls, where you call, you announce yourself, who you are, so they know who the participants of the call are. And this is back in 2020, so this is before Zoom was huge like it is now. It was still on Citrix, right? There was no videos. It was like a giant conference call, and put all the information in. The live operator comes on. That's the group. I remember it was this operator 24637. I forget what the number was, but they had a operator number, and they said this call is off the record. That's interesting, off the record. I didn't know if we were on or off the record. Obviously, this call's off the record. We're going to turn over to our host, Nicole Frazier, Special Assistant, President Trump. Take it away. And I was like, what? No. This woman, Nicole Frazier, comes on and starts talking. On the line is representatives from the White House, representatives from the SBA, representatives from the Department of Labor, representatives from the Department of Treasury. And think back, so this is, we were about the second week of COVID at this point. It was late March at this point, and everybody, the scene, it felt like the whole country was getting laid off. I remember the gentleman from the Department of Labor getting on the phone and talking about 17 million unemployment claims, some unfathomable number, how just structurally, as a country, we weren't set up for the process this number of unemployment claims. He said, so what we're doing is we're working on a program to basically have business owners keep people working. They're going to pay to keep people working, and we're going to fund the businesses because we found that that's the quickest way to get money to the people who need it, is because there's already this employee relationship. And I remember just thinking to myself, what in the world is going on? But the program he was describing, ultimately a couple of days later, was the CARES Act was passed, and the CARES Act put in place the PPP, which is that loan program where fund as long as you kept people working, you get the PPP loan. If you kept them working, that loan was forgiven, right? But part of the CARES Act was the employee retention credit as well, and there were a number of other government programs that came out as a result of the CARES Act, and one of the biggest government introductions and support of private business ever seen in this country. So for the next few weeks, we did a ton of PPP work, and so that was the primary focus for really most of 2020. And I remember in the very early days of PPP when nobody knew what was going on, even the banks didn't know what was going on. It was really building the programs from scratch, and I remember having phone calls at 2 a.m. with commercial bankers trying to figure out what's going on with this client and how are you processing it, and what have you heard from. 2 a.m. It was crazy times. And I remember that very first time we had a couple of weeks where we had a bunch of applications for PPP, and then there was nothing. It was just crickets. Nobody was getting funded. Nobody knew what was going on, and time seemed to slow down during COVID. And there were queues of these PPP applications everywhere. And then I remember, I forget when it was, but it was mid-April, where all of a sudden one day I got like 10 or 15 approvals. And I remember calling clients up who've been waiting, right? So we're roughly 3-4 weeks in the pandemic at this point, and they're paying with effectively zero revenue during this time period. They're making things work, and calling them up and listen, you got approved, you got 100,000, and you got 150,000. You got 180. And I remember one person had almost $1 million PPP loan. And I remember one guy, his response to me, he was like, yes, I knew it was the right thing to do, work with you. Oh my God, thank you so much. I remember another woman, she started crying. You saved me. I don't know how to do this stuff. I would have never known how to do this stuff without you. And thank you. I could run my business, but I didn't know how to do this number of finance and loans and grant stuff. And so that was, one of the most memorable days for me professionally speaking, one of the most impactful days professionally speaking, that first day when we got that round of PPP approvals. And really it's blossomed from there. And since that time period when I remember just frankly myself concerned about me, my family, my businesses, viability going forward as the entire economy shut down, we just leaned really hard into the government aid programs and found that there was a lot of support for businesses. It was complex. It was confusing. There was a lot of overlapping provisions you had to be cautious of. If we really put the client first, that this was an incredibly powerful way to serve our community. That's how the Mewes Group really developed its expertise in this area. And it's something that I'm very proud of and continue to be proud of. So that's a little bit about my story.